Well, good morning, Perkin, Elmer. How are you this morning? We're going to deal with this morning like an old Western. You know, where you show the city of Dodge, that's the long shot. We're going to talk about innovation, and we're going to talk about how all the things you know about innovation, and you're all great innovators, are basically wrong. Right? We're going to spend the morning kind of destroying that. Then we're going to go to the Dodge. We're going to go to the Tumbleweed Street now that we're in Dodge. We're going to talk about culture and competency and what we actually know about what produces value and what actually destroys value. And then we're going to get your close up. Then we're going to talk about you. We're going to talk about you do. We're going to talk about how what you do actually creates or destroys value and some tricks of the trade of what you can do. And then in the afternoon, we're going to do a workshop where we're going to build on all of this. We're going to have a little fun this morning. So let's start. I cribbed some notes from Rob this morning. How will we find areas of opportunity to work together on a problem, share ideas, leverage resources, and create novel solutions if we don't understand the breadth and depth of our company? That's exactly what we're going to work on today. We're going to talk about how to connect all the dots, how to sync it up, and how innovation is basically a horizontal phenomenon. But I want to start with an observation. Being the dean of innovation, I am constantly stopped because I spend so much time in airports like a doctor. You know, where doctors, you talk to a doctor, they say, oh, I've got a thing here. Can you look at it? They all want to talk to me about gear. Every time I'm anywhere. So flying out here last night, the guy wants to talk about gear. What's the newest thing? Do you remember the gearheads in high school? Do you remember those guys? They're gearheads. They're all gearheads now. It's all about blockchain, which most people don't even understand, and augmented reality, and everything's AI. Full disclosure, I'm an old PhD in AI, right? I'm a recovering technologist. Admitting it is the first step to getting better, right? That's the first step to rehabilitation. But what I'm going to point out to you is why this is all good and important. It's not really the innovation game. And I want to start with a wonderful quote from the crazy guy Schopenhauer, the famous German philosopher with crazy hair. Every man takes the limits of his own field of vision for the limits of the world. Have you talked to anybody lately about politics or religion? How's that going for you? Have you changed anybody's mind? There's a term for this. It's called dominant logic. I call it dominant worldview, where you believe in something so strongly you can't see anything else. And in fact, social media only exasperates the situation. Think about it. If somebody on your social media doesn't agree with you, what do? You unfriend them. The Spanish Inquisition couldn't have thought of this. On a dark night, on a dark road, all the stupid people go away. Yeah. So what we're going to have to work on today is how to see beyond our blind spots. If we're really going to connect this organization up, we're going to have to open up our eyes. Now, I want to start with a very radical proposition. I'm going to talk about this later. This is often referred to as Schumpeter's Gale, and I'll talk about Schumpeter later. But basically, what Schumpeter said is he said when it comes to innovation, and actually in general in the economy, he said we are not destroyed by competitors. I want to repeat this. He said we are not destroyed by competitors. He's basically taking on Adam Smith. And incidentally, we have had nine, count them, Nobel laureates since 1969 that said Schumpeter was right. Adam Smith was wrong. And what Schumpeter said is our dominant logic gets so strong that we can't see that the whole idea of changing is so odious that we destroy ourselves. So here's the question for you. Why didn't Sears become Amazon? I want you to think about your childhood, the Wish book. They were crawling in money. They had technology, right? Enormous amounts of technology. They didn't become Amazon. Why? It wasn't competitive. They just didn't want to do that because they were protecting their rents. Think about McDonald's. Think about McDonald's and Starbucks. McDonald's had coffee from time immemorial. How did they let Starbucks into this game? It was, in fact, when you look at Consumer Reports, who has better coffee? I know you out here in Boston, you say Dunkin' Donuts. Okay, Dunkin' Donuts, that's true. Why didn't GM become Tesla? Anybody ever heard of the EV1? The EV1 was developed when? 1990. 1990, we start seeing these kind of engines. Why doesn't General Motors become Tesla? And then finally, why didn't Microsoft become Google? You know, Larry Page had been one of my students at Michigan. What was it that allowed them in? And it had nothing to do with competition. It had everything to do with your dominant logic is so strong that you're unwilling to see where things are going. So I want to tell you what an alternative definition for innovation. In 1993, the federal government asked me to help them write their definition for the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, etc. Here is my definition, which I lifted entirely from Marshall McLuhan. How many here are old enough to remember Marshall McLuhan? Anybody remember who he was? He was a famous University of Toronto professor. He was crazy. And in 1961, he wrote a book called Understanding Media, where he talks about the internet, which we won't see in any real form until 1997. He's that guy, very prescient. Well, he says the first thing about innovation is it pays in the future. So I'm coming back from Shanghai the other day. This guy sitting next to me said, Jeff, is the dollar going to go up or down? And I said, it's going to go down. And he said, why do you say that? And I said, because it's up. And that's what currencies do. They go up and down. Duh. Didn't you go to school? I don't know. I don't know where the guy went to school. Maybe he was a Buckeye or something. I don't know. Anyway, he said, when? I said, if I knew when, I sure as hell wouldn't be telling a pathetic loser like you when the dollar was going to go down. I'd be speculating the dollar. I'd be George Soros. I'd be rich. I'd have a penthouse somewhere. I'd be that guy. Now, here's the interesting point. The number one form of resistance to innovation is what? It's excessive data gathering. How many have been to the meeting about the meeting? How many have seen the report about the report? You're stuck in the planning cycle. You're stuck in the planning cycle, and while you're stuck, what is the small startup company that can't compete on scope or scale doing? They're running the experiment. They're accelerating the failure cycle. So the number one thing is there's an epistemological problem. There is no data on the future. None. Who wants to bet the mortgage on the midterm election? Anybody? Yeah. Talk's cheap. It takes money to buy whiskey, doesn't it? Number two, innovation has a limited shelf life. So the other day, about a year and a half ago, I'm the keynote speaker of the American Medical Association. I'm doing a big project with them to train fourth-year medical students around the country. Now, here's the interesting thing. I'm looking down the road at Michigan Avenue, and there's people all the way down the road at Michigan Avenue, and I'm thinking, this is a big deal. I'm a big deal now. You know, there's probably 4,000 or 5,000 people at the conference, but I'm thinking there's another 5,000 or 6,000 people on Michigan Avenue. And then it occurs to me, what's happening the same day I'm speaking? Apple has come out with the new phone. And they're all lined up around the block. I can't see the Apple store. Humilite, mea culpa, right? So here's the interesting thing. Think about it for a minute. What happens to the last iPhone when the new iPhone comes out? It's crap. It's rubbish, just in time for Christmas. All the great swag you bought for your kids last Christmas, guess what it is this Christmas? Crap. You got to buy new stuff because innovation is only an innovation for a moment in time. It goes sour like milk. You know, it's an ephemeral thing. It's the only form of ephemeral value we have. And innovation enhances something. What did Google enhance? If you say, boy, the algorithm was better, actually it wasn't. If you say, well, you know, they were the first search company, were they? They had better money? No, actually they didn't. It was easier. Do you remember the little box? The little box? The first time you saw the little box? You know when I knew it worked? I was in a Starbucks. And two young women in front of me said, the one woman said, oh, I met a new boy last night. And the other woman said, did you Google him? And I thought, oh my God, this is going to work. Did you Google him? Oh, is he a local offender or something? We got to know, right? This is a real application. Another thing McLuhan said that I think is critical, and it's something I'm going to push everybody on this room, given the last wonderful panel you had up here. An innovation kills something. It eliminates something. What is your innovation eliminating? Right? I want you to think about this for a minute. I want you to think that every brokerage in the whole world had a back office trading system. Everybody did. And remember E.F. Hutton, the quiet company? They got real quiet because the innovations that Schwab and E-Trade and a lot of stuff that happened up here in Boston, a lot of that technology did what? It eliminated the need for the broker. And you're going to see this over and over and over again, that a real innovation will displace what's called diffusion. It will displace something else. And innovation returns us to something. This is my favorite. People always think about the future like we're going to be living in Blade Runner or the Jetsons, or we're going to be flying around in cars. What do most of us want? We want to live like hobbits. We want to go home where it's safe and there's soup on the stove and everybody knows each other. We want to go back, don't we? So our houses now look like houses from a long time ago, and the new cities have a high street like it's Kensington High Street, and we're taking little blue pills so that we feel like we're 25 again. So an innovation has this nostalgic part to it that people want to feel like they've gone back to something. And most importantly, McLuhan has a warning. And his warning is, over time, an innovation reverses into its opposite. It becomes the anti-innovation. How many remember when phone mail was going to set you free? You remember that? And you look down the hallway here and you walk around. I went to eat last night, everyone's doing this. Everyone is a mindless drone to phone mail, right? So the whole thing was going to set you free has made you a slave. Now, this is very different than gear. This could include lots of different stuff. So let's look at a good example. In 2014, incidentally, I don't know if you know this, yesterday was the anniversary of the collapse of Lehman Brothers. It's been exactly 1 decade since the whole thing collapsed. In 2006, I was an advisor to the Federal Reserve. This was one of those interesting things where everybody said after it collapsed, nobody saw it coming. I can tell you as a fact, everybody saw it coming. You either saw it coming and you knew what it was, or you saw all the portents, but your dominant logic was so strong, you didn't want to get out. Right? Look at all the smiles on your faces. You knew about 05, 06 that something was very, very wrong. And yet you didn't act. Why? Because your dominant logic is so strong. This is the longest bull market we've ever had. What's the real question people are asking today? When does it end? Because bull markets don't go on forever. And how does it end? And when? Yeah, what do I need to do about this? Well, I want to give you my favorite example. In 2014, Michael Lewis, who I love, he's the guy who wrote Moneyball and all those really good books, wrote a book called Flash Boys. Did anybody read Flash Boys? It was about how the fix was in from the big banks. And the big banks used a lot of technology to create what are called spread networks. And spread networks trade a little bit faster than you guys can get on the network. So they buy early when the stock is beginning to run up milliseconds earlier, which is worth, incidentally, hundreds of millions of dollars. And they sell earlier. So they get to long and short faster than the rest of us do. So it doesn't matter whether Michigan or Notre Dame wins the game. The bookie always makes money. The bookie, they're skimming. And that was the whole deal, right? That was where everything was going to go. Except there was a problem, and that was in 2008, who got blown out? Young people got blown out. They got blown out bad. Young people and retirees. Now, they couldn't play in the system, so what did they do? They adopted another system. And the other system they adopted was called cryptocurrencies, meaning you're disintermediating the financial community. And it wasn't for practical reasons. And incidentally, where did cryptocurrencies really start getting play? And don't say the 03 paper, because that's what scientific nerds say, and that's not where it started. Where did cryptocurrencies start? They started in the drug trade, money laundering. This is how money moved without federal governments around the world seeing it. Innovation doesn't necessarily start in nice places. Where did emojis start? Terrorist cells, because you can't pick them up in content analysis. Where did streaming start? The porn industry. Now, I'm not saying go look at these industries. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying when you can't compete on scope or scale, when you're out, you have to try something radical. In the words of that great Nobel laureate, when you ain't got nothing, you got nothing to lose. You got nothing to lose. And that's where innovation starts. So in the whole idea that innovation is going to be better technology, what we're seeing is alternative technologies. Now, I'll grant you, there's a number of problems with cryptocurrencies, and people fundamentally don't understand them, and they work in a very weird way. But here's the interesting thing. The banks are on notice that what's going to happen. They're going to be disrupted by groups of people who are not institutionalized. And this is a warning to you. This is the same warning. If I think about what's going on in your sector, there are all the incumbents, but what I would be concerned about are the people who aren't on your radar right now. I'd be concerned about the people who are doing tests with an iPhone or things that you didn't know you could do a test with. That becomes the interesting dislocation. So the art of progress is to preserve order amid change. You have to do that. You have shareholders. You guys have been great. I was looking at your guidance this morning, right? +7, you're a buy everywhere. You've had a pretty good year. Now, that sounds pretty good, except when it comes to innovation, that's a pretty bad thing. You've had a good year, but in innovation, that's often a pretty bad thing. So I'm going to turn this around on you in just a minute. And to preserve change amid order, that's your challenge. You've done well. Your challenge is you've done well. What happens in life when you've done well? You know, it's the equivalent of when you get tenure. What happens when you get tenure? You know, you're not maybe not as hungry as you used to be. Now, here's the challenge we all have. And I want to start with myself as a terrible hypocrite. I am a horrible hypocrite. I drive the 03 Mercedes that I've driven forever. I don't like to buy new cars. I sit in the Is anybody like that? I sit in the same seats. I'm not prone to try something that I don't see how it makes my life better. And the reason is organizations like people have this tension. And the first tension is to maintain your life. You're trying to maintain your life. And you're trying to maintain your life because you've accomplished a few things. You've made a little money. Maybe you've got a few chevrons on your sleeve. Life is pretty good. But there comes a point in every person's life where you want what? You want to grow. You want something different. You want more. And in order to do that, you have to introduce, and this is the key word for this morning, you have to introduce deviance. Innovation is a form of positive deviance. The more deviant the innovation is, the more potentially valuable it is. Are you willing in your life to do that? Now, here's the interesting thing. Who comes to me? I get all these CEOs who've been incredibly successful. They've made a lot of money. They've hit 60. And what's the first thing they say? My life is boring. I need to do something different. Now, hopefully you don't buy the Harley and, get the biker girlfriend or whatever it is you're doing in your life. Hopefully you're a little more responsible than that, but, who am I to judge? But the notion is this tension also goes on with companies like Perkin and Elmer. Right? You have this tension. You've done well, but you've got to find new growth engine, don't you? Now, here's the key. What if I told you this tension wasn't a bad thing? What if I told you this was the generative engine for innovation? This is the reason we innovate. We innovate because we have this tension and we have to find a third way. So let's talk about this new world of work that we're entering. How many here have millennial children? Children, 30 to 18, okay, got them? Okay, people sheepishly, no, okay, so you've got some. So when I came up, innovation was about deep and domain expertise. You get a PhD, you go to a lab, you write a lot of papers, and people go, you go to a good university, whatever. And it was all about research universities and top schools, and it was all about corporate development centers, and that's kind of my life for a little while. But then around 2000, something weird kind of happens, where we start getting entrepreneurs. We start getting these things called COINs, Collaborative Open Innovation Networks, like WeWork, and think about those kind of things that are going on. Some of my friends built that. And we get a lot of incubators and venture capital, and it's a really funny thing where I live. I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan. It's a city of 116,000 people, and it has more venture capital right now than any city on the planet. And it's weird, because once you move outside of that basic area, everything is different. The same is true for Cambridge out here. Palo Alto, you can see this all around the world. Gary in North Carolina. So the interesting challenge is innovation used to be vertical, and now it's horizontal. Innovation is about connecting dots and syncing up in community. So in the old days, it was about corporations, and now it's about federated organizations. Think about this for a minute. The most valuable company in the world, worth $1 trillion, is Apple. Does Apple make any of their product? Does everybody follow this? Do they make it? This is a real question. Do they make any of their product? And the answer is they don't. Basically, it's like 2%. Mostly these are companies like Foxconn and Innovatrium, and these federated organizations make the Apple product. Is it open source, or is it a closed system? It's a closed system. So the whole notion here that somehow corporations still exist, the largest corporation in the world, actually the two largest in the world, are federation corporations. They're not normal. They're effusive. Their strategic planning has been replaced by idea markets and hurdle rates by crowdfunding and portfolio management by innovation tournaments. You get the point. It's now a team sport. It used to be something that really smart people did in the lab, and now it's what you guys do. It's your job now, right? And that's what Rob was telling you. It's your job. It's your job to find the next growth engine. It's your job to connect all the dots. It's your job to get around the boundaries. Now, I came to a revelation on this in 1993. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the details of this, but I do want to talk about a little bit about my work. In 1993, I started looking at all the big innovation indexes. And I thought, wow, I'm new to the field. This is interesting. And I compared them to the growth benchmark on Wall Street, which is called the Russell 2500. And I had a revelation, and my revelation was, up until 1993, none of these indexes had ever beaten the growth index. Meaning, if you would have put $1 in an index stock, you would have made money more than if you would have bet on any of these innovation indexes. Everybody following us? So it tells you right off the bat what? That a lot of this is bullshit. right? A lot of this is hocus pocus stuff. What really makes an innovative company is a lot of PR. Then the second revelation I've had is that I looked at this all the way to this year. How many have ever won it 2 years in a row? Have ever beaten it 2 years in a row? And the answer is 0. Does everybody follow what I'm getting at here? So the whole notion of what we believe about what's really an innovative company, the top 100, whenever they do that thing, you'd be better off putting your money into a stock or buying into Lowe's. Innovation has to pay in a corporate setting. We don't innovate for innovation's sake. We innovate to produce something of value. And hopefully the products and services that we produce are so extraordinary and help patients in so many ways and help the people who treat patients in so many ways that we get our value proposition. So sometime around the early 1990s, I started scratching my head, and I very early on started visiting China. So I think my first trip to China is like 1989. I was arrested in Xi'an, and I was taken to the police station because they had never seen an American before. They took pictures of me with a Red Army hat. They wore my Michigan hat. I still have pictures on my desk. But one of the things that really astounded me was the concept of the Tao. Now, most of the people, when they talk about the Tao, they talk about balance and see how the yang is in the yin and, the male energy and the female energy. But actually, I think that's a misinterpretation of the Tao. The Tao basically says the world has opposing forces. And opposing forces create hybrids or new forces. In the West, we call this Hegelian logic. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? The whole idea that things that are not alike produce new things. And if you think about the American story, the American story is the story of immigration. The history of innovation in the United States is the history of immigration, and it is to this day, 58% of all patents awarded in Silicon Valley in the last decade were awarded to either people who were not born in this country or first-generation Americans. Is everybody following this? So the notion is difference kind of has something to do with this. Now, out of this, they created a lot of things like the I Ching, the Book of Changes, where there are 8 situations and 8 elements to those situations. And the reason they did it is it's low-level artificial intelligence. I want you to imagine, somebody's a yam farmer in the countryside, and you got to muster up the army because the Huns are coming from the west. This is how they get somebody to think at a very, very basic level what to do in what situations. And out of this came a bunch of how-to books, including The Art of War. And whether Sun Tzu was even a real person is a controversy. There's really no historic record of this person. But the notion is just a how-to manual that's basically based on the Tao. And out of this comes the Lupin, or the whole notion of feng shui, the whole notion of how you sort of put your life together. Now, what I'm trying to get you to understand is on this very basic idea of conflict, positive conflict, comes an entire ethos of a civilization. The longest running civilization this planet has produced, at least that we know, about 4,000 years. So out of this, I went back and I started looking at the market. And I started looking at the market starting in about 1996. But what I started looking for were indicators that were typically oppositional. Things that typically, when one goes up, one typically goes down. What's called conjoint analysis. And what I discovered was when these oppositional things showed up together as high, those stocks outperformed the Russell 2500 every year since 1996, except for 6. I've only lost to it 6 times. So this is not the junk science of BuzzFeed and I'm this type and I'm an ENTP or an INFJ. It's not that. This is saying actually what pays is when these oppositional things show up in a healthy, constructive, innovative way. The essence of great leadership is, first of all, not being satisfied with the present when we see a path to the better future. That's the tension. That's what Rob is talking about. He's talking about this tension. He's concerned. We've got to get to the next place, right? We've got to get to the next place. So what we're going to work on today is a very weird idea, and that is we're going to say that these ideas have to engage each other in such a way that they produce a third idea. Now, what I am not saying, we don't talk disrespectfully to people. This is not about argument for the case of argument. How many are tired of the political scene right now? Am I the only one? Everybody's yelling over the fence at everybody else, right? There doesn't seem to be anything constructive coming out of this. So the notion is we're talking about being respectful to people, but we're talking about challenging ideas. Challenging sort of the framework of the maintenance of the organization in a positive, constructive way so we can take it forward. Now, I'm going to play a little game with you. And the game goes like this. Everybody at their table has 2 cards. I'm going to ask you to get up. You can't stay at your table. Mill around the room. And to trade for 2 cards that you are insanely great at. When I was young, I got to be an advisor to Steve Jobs. All right, great Steve Jobs quote. You're insanely great at. Now, if somebody tries to get one of your cards and they're not insanely great, you say to them, you're not insanely great. I'm not giving you this card. Right? So everybody at the end of a few minutes here, I'm only giving you a few minutes, ends up with 2 cards you're insanely great at. And if you can't end up with 2 cards you're insanely great at, we're going to skip the afternoon and work on your suck-up skills. Because you got to be more charming. Does everybody follow this? Don't fall in love with the first boy you kiss. Everybody stand up. You must mill around the room. 2 cards, you're insanely great at. Let's go. Ready, set, go. Now, everybody should have 2 cards. What I need you to do now is I want you to find out of the 2 cards which one you are insanely great at. So you're going to turn the other card over, and now you're only going to have 1 card. 1 card. Yes, I know you're all the colors of the rainbow, but 1 card. Make a choice. Okay? Everybody got their 1 card. Their 1 special card. Those of you who your 1 card is a yellow card, I need you to stand up and stay standing. Take a good look. Take a good look. Yellow card. Stay standing. Stay standing. Those of you who have a blue card, I want you to raise your left hand as high as you can so we can all see it. Blue card. Yellows, look at the blue. Blue, look at the yellows. This is the enemy. These are the people who should have been fired a long time ago. Yeah, they're making your life hell. All right, everybody sit down, put your hands down. Those of you with a green card, I need you to stand up and stay standing so we can see you. Those of you with a red card, I want you to raise your right hand as high as you can so we can see you. Greens, look at the reds. Reds, look at the greens. These are the naysayers, liars, and thieves of Perkin Elmer. You have no idea how these rascals got in here. Okay, everybody down. Yeah. Yeah. So the good news is we don't have to create constructive conflict here. You already have some. Now, this is often referred to as the innovation genome or the competing values framework, sometimes referred to the innovation code. You've seen this a million different times. I'm the 3rd researcher on this model. And basically, this model is a model that says there are different forms of value propositions, and they go way beyond the individual, and they push against each other. We're going to talk about that a little bit here. So, first of all, there's the issue of magnitude, which means how much. How much innovation are we really looking for? And this is the tension between radical innovation, which is the greens, and incremental innovation at scale with no risk, which is the reds. So we're going to call the greens the forward position. We're going to call the reds the aft position. So greens are always attacking, and reds are always defending. Is everybody following this? So how many have been in the service? Anybody serve in the military? Then you're probably familiar with these terms. Now, the blues and the yellows have a tension around how fast do we move. The blues are very short-term performance oriented. The yellows are very sustainable oriented. So the blues go very fast, but they're not very sustainable. The yellows go very slow, but they're highly sustainable. This is going to be an enormous issue at the workplace about boomers and millennials. We're going to talk about that a little bit later, but this is what we're going to call the middling positions. So there's only 2 questions that every innovator has to ask. It's very simple. How much and how fast? How much and how fast? Are we talking about, global warming in the 1960s? Are we talking about global warming in 2018? Are we talking about that, someday a meteor could hit the Earth, or 6 weeks from now a meteor is planning to hit the Earth? What are we talking about? And that's going to determine what plays we use. So one size doesn't fit all, but every size has its own virtue. I like to think of us like superheroes. The Fantastic Four, or the Marvel Avengers, or whatever it is. Everybody has a super strength, but are they good around everything? No, they all have weaknesses, they all have vulnerabilities, and they all have one thing they do really well, but they do other things not so well. Now, interestingly enough, we're going to talk about the not so well as well. No one is perfect in this room. And I like to think of ourselves as nesting dolls, Russian nesting dolls, right? The Matryoshka doll. You ever see, I think of myself, oh, you know, every summer we'll go up to Traverse City and I'll sit on the beach and I'll drink a beer. And I'll say, you know, I've had it with this crap. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to stay up here and I'm going to write a crappy science fiction novel. Oh, well, come on, look at you. You all have something like this, don't you? I'm going to start a store, bake cookies, whatever it is you're going to do, right? But there's something on top of your nesting doll, which is what? The boss, the family, people are telling you, you don't want to, you shouldn't be doing that. And if my wife said to me, oh, it'd be great, go to Traverse City and live up there, I know I'd have some real problems at home. Probably should be attending to that. But the notion is there's always people around you who don't want you to do what you want to do. And the notion of self-help is, oh, I just want to do this, so I'm going to do it. But that's not the real world, is it? In the real world, we do things for other people. We care about other people. We want to be respected by other people. That's the problem with self-help literature. I'm just going to do all this stuff, and it's going to be for me, me, me. But the world around it doesn't act that way. And finally, there's the real world. And the real world doesn't really even care about your family or community or Perkin Elmer. It doesn't care. There's going to be a recession at some point. There's going to be a land war at some point. There's going to be a pandemic. Why? Because there always is. And it's going to change what all of us do because we're going to have to react to it. But here becomes the issue. There's not only tension within yourself, there's tension between yourself and your group. There's tension between your group and what needs to go on in the environment at large, the real world. Now let's talk about these one at a time. Greens, raise your hand so we can see the greens. Greens, where are you, greens? Rock on, greens. The fact that they're even here is amazing. Greens have the attention span of a gnat. They're usually by now across the street drinking, forming an IPO, or starting a revolution. Right? You don't go party with the greens tonight. Why? Because a green always drives the Harley into the pool. It's always the green. Because greens love to make it up as they go along. They're risk takers. Greens like to try stuff. My favorite example of a green thing happened about 4 years ago at CERN at the Large Hadron Collider, where the Bose-Higgs, the God particle, was discovered. My nephew happens to be a professor at Johns Hopkins in physics, at their big physics lab. Interestingly enough, there are 7 Nobel Prize winners, and some of you will know this. 2 of them were concerned about starting the Large Hadron Collider because why? They thought it would create what? That's very good. They thought it'd create a microfissure, a black hole. They thought they would create a black hole and destroy reality as we know it. They bet a beer and pulled the switch. See you in hell, Jurgen. These are the greens. Never tell the greens there's a switch. Never let the greens touch the switch because the greens will pull the stupid switch. They're greens. So greens are all about unique. They do well in unique situations, things we haven't seen before. Breakthrough things where we need a miracle drug, or highly differentiated markets like we're trying to create microbreweries or haute couture. The organizations are called adhocracy organizations because they're basically making it up as they go along. They're searching for the next thing. They're idea junkies. And they're artists. They like creativity and they like discovery. So their magnitude of innovation is very high. Their momentum is relatively medium because some stuff's going to happen when? Tomorrow. And the rest of it when hell freezes over. Right? And finally, the risk is high. Think about this. This is Elon Musk's announcement yesterday. Oh, big surprise. What was his big announcement? I'm having trouble making the car. I'm like, yeah, because once you conceive of the car, you actually have to bend metal and make the stupid thing. Go get some reds, okay? And you might want to listen to them for a change, right? Oh, I'm only 61,000 cars short this month, right? It's a typical green problem. So greens, the situation where they're going to shine is where it's really radical, and we need a home run, a Hail Mary pass, whatever you call it. They love taking risks. They're always about the future. They're always trying to see the future. You know, these are the people who write blogs about what happens after the thing that happens, and they're always testing boundaries. That's greens, why you piss everybody off. If you tell a green, you can't smoke here, what's a green going to do? You're going to stand in the doorway in between where you can't smoke and you can, and they're going to smoke. And you're going to go, why are you doing this? Because you told them you couldn't do that, and greens are like that. So you're going to find them in places like strategy. Strategy is about what? It's about what hasn't happened yet, right? It's about the future where we have no data. Greens love that. We're going to find them in the arts. We're going to find them working for themselves. Inevitably, greens in the end work for greens. They're not the most collaborative group we've ever seen. The Lone Ranger. Because what do greens want? Greens want freedom. Greens, when they get money, they don't buy islands and they don't buy airplanes. They buy what? They buy freedom. I'm free! Richard Branson or whatever, whoever you're looking at, that's what they're going to do. One of my favorite examples of green company, I thought this was interesting given that you make so many instruments. This is a friend of mine named Tan Lee. She's been on the cover of a lot of magazines lately. She's a serial entrepreneur. She's one of the boat children from Vietnam who ended up in Australia and then became one of these great entrepreneurs. But basically what she did was she took EEGs and she made them fashionable and she made them interesting. And now, did you see recently somebody's going to drive a race car with this? I saw this in the news yesterday, and it's now being used for people who have lost limbs in combat. And it's being used by paraplegics. And so the whole idea is taking a technology, sort of turning it on its head, making it more available, making it more unique. And this is, I think, a pretty good example of this. Now, having said that greens are our forward position, where are my reds? Reds, where are you? Okay, reds. Now, you know who the reds are? Look at how, first of all, reds again, raise your hands. Just look at the reds. They're nicely coiffed. They've been jogging this morning. They've done all their email. They're quietly singing, hi-ho, it's off to work we go. The Reds, they know the right way and the wrong way to do things. And they're going to tell you when you're doing it the wrong way, which is basically most of the time. Reds know the rules about everything. Reds are predictable. Reds love things that are at scale and are cautious. My favorite red organization in the whole world is McDonald's, where some illiterate kid presses a cheeseburger button, and simultaneously somebody shoots a cow in Argentina. Bang! And everything in between is happening. And they're going, Smithers, come here. These are reds. It's all working beautifully now. Everything everywhere is working beautifully. So they love things that are predictable, and their organizations are very hierarchical. They're all about efficiency and quality. Occam's razor, it is more virtuous to do with less what could be done with more. These are the people who go to Costco and buy 5 years worth of toilet paper because they got a coupon. And when their house goes up in smoke real fast, it burned up real fast, the fire marshal goes, what happened? The garage was filled with toilet paper. These are the Reds. They've never bought anything retail in their life. They're Reds. They know how everything works. They're all about doing more with less. They're all about measuring twice and cutting once, and they have a number of annoying sayings. Where are my Reds again? We don't like your stupid sayings. They have a lot of them. Measure twice, cut one, all this kind of stuff. A broken clock, no. Because they like to know that there's an order to the world. They're very engineering oriented, they like security, and they like productivity. So here's the thing about engineers. The order of magnitude, or chaos, is relatively low. But the order of momentum is actually about the same as the greens. They're not particularly slow. There's people in this room who are slower. But here's the key. The risk is low. And these people are great at scale. These are the scale people. We're getting to scale. So when we talk about the great new product in the panel up here, what's the real question? How do we get it to scale? How do we connect the people who are developing all the radical stuff, the whammy-zammy stuff, with scale? So care and feeding. What we're going to look for Reds, we're going to look for very large projects, things that have a lot of moving parts. You know, we're making a Dreamliner. It's got 2 million moving parts. It's got to fly for 50 years. We're going to take a task where we have a lot of technical expertise. There's a right way and a wrong way to do things. We're unlocking the secrets of nature. There's sort of a data component to all this. When we talk about big data and AI, these are these guys. We're going to find them in engineering. We're going to find them in the military, medicine. We're going to find them where there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. And what attracts them is responsibility. We're going to give them medals. We're going to count their chevrons. We're going to kiss their ring. We're going to genuflect. We're going to do whatever we need to do to have acceptable esprit de corps. So I'm in Seattle the other day. One of my clients has got this new thing where they've got a grocery store. It's like a Tesco, just like an old Tesco. But you go in and you pick a sandwich and you leave, and it automatically is deducted from your account. Now, I'm an old guy, so I have to like wave my phone around like I'm an idiot around the wand. Because I don't want to feel like I'm stealing. Hey, no, I'm stealing. But the whole concept here is not radical. It's just a store that you don't need people in, that automatically replenishes, which is a very Red solution. So Reds are very much part of the innovation economy right now, and an essential part of the innovation economy. Now, here's the first question. Do you feel tension here at Perkin Elmer between people who are really out at the edge, right? People who are really doing amazing stuff, but it's not very scalable, and it's pretty chaotic. And the people who have to get things to meet regulations, get to scale, fit within the existing systems that you have. Do you feel that tension at work? It's not a tension of type. It's a tension of value proposition. The more radical the innovation, what does that do to quality? It introduces variation to something that you're trying to eliminate variation. Is this making sense? What you're doing is you're actually destroying the other value proposition. So this is not a type issue. This is an issue of what you want and what I want are completely different. But I come back to this. What we see in here is when these two things show up together, right, this is Storm and Beast. Beast is this MIT scientist, and Storm is, of course, this lock picker from Africa who turns out to control the crazy weather. When we put these things together, we see something extraordinary. A more effective one that maybe you can relate to. I was watching a documentary last night about Lennon and McCartney. So you got Lennon, who's the classic green, and you got McCartney, who's the classic red. It becomes the basis of the Beatles. We're going to see this over and over and over again. Where are my blues? Blues. Raise your hands. Blues. Look at the blues. Look at the way they're kind of nonchalant. The blues. Yeah, I'm here. What you got? Look at the blues. Veins popping alarmingly out of their head. They look like gangster rappers. I got it, blues. I got it. Tough guys. Blues love a competitive situation. They compete for everything. Top 10, bottom 10, blues. Right? Follow the stock market. They want to know who the best is. Who's leading the American League East? Blues. Blues, blues, blues. World Cup, blues. They're aggressive and demanding situation. Blues are the warriors. They're the athletes. They're combat situations. This is where we find our Marines, the Devil Dogs, or whatever you call them, your Delta Force in your country, whatever you call these guys. Grinders. Very much about a situation. It's us and them. And incidentally, if you want to get the blues blood up, introduce them. Right? Whenever blues feel complacent, always show a competitor. Oh, there's a guy now. The blues are like, oh man, we got to kick their ass, right? We got to get those guys. They're what we call a market form of organization because they're all about speed and profitability. They don't care whether it's tangerines or aerospace. Blues are out to win because they're looking to create goals and they're looking to achieve those goals. And finally, blues are all about vitality and prosperity. So blues are the ones who get up every morning and run against some kind of clock, or they run a marathon even though they're not really into running, and you go, why are you doing this? Because their whole thing is that I'm showing that I'm a superior person. So their magnitude actually is medium. They think that they're radical innovators. Blues, where are your hands again? See the blues. You're not radical. Go get a green and you'll see what radical is. You won't drive the Harley into the pool. You'll watch. Their momentum, though, is fast. Blues have a positive disposition towards action. If a blue decides to do something at 2 o'clock in the morning, when does he start doing it? 2 o'clock in the morning. Blues have no patience. They're the people in the grocery store always jumping lines. Blues, their sustainability is very low. The delta on these stocks is very high. So the care and feeding of the athlete, their challenges, and they always want to have results, and they want to compete against the other people. I teach at the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. We grade on a curve. We're one of the three schools that still grades on a curve. And we say things like, don't send your ducks to Eagle School, and stuff like that. Right? And when they go to the street, I know we have the most CEOs of the Fortune 500 of any of the schools, including Harvard, in the United States. And part of it is that whole bare-knuckle way of teaching people, of saying only 10% are going to get the A. Now, a task where the athletes absolutely thrive. Pursuing goals, focusing on competitors, overcoming barriers. They're almost pre-verbal. You ever been in the blue meeting? It's like a drive-by shooting. Bang, bang, bang. PowerPoint slides everywhere because they can't speak in complete sentences. These are blues. You're fired, you're hired, you move. So let it be written, so let it be done. These are the blues. And everyone else is in therapy. Oh my God, they started to, yeah, the blues, they're blues. Shakespeare's very unfortunate quote, dogs are made for the gripping. That's what Shakespeare meant. Where are we likely to find the athlete? Finance, brand management, any place where it rolls up to the market, where we get to compare you against someone else. They love the challenge. And what attracts them is the challenge and the resources that come with it. Here's my favorite example, and now other companies are following us like Allstate. Progressive. Progressive did a very blue thing. Progressive put a thing in your car, this is almost a decade old now, that gave them feedback on how you're driving. And if you're driving poorly, what happens to your insurance rates? They go up. And if you're driving really well, what happens to your insurance rates? They go down. And what happens to the people who are driving poorly who are paying a lot for insurance? They leave Progressive. And who's left? All the real winners are left on Progressive. That's a pretty good racket if you're an insurance company. That's how Progressive did. Get rid of the losers, right? That's Progressive. Where are my yellows? Yellows. Okay, yellows. This is very important. I want to talk about blues and yellows, so let me frame this for just a moment. I'm a baby boomer. I'm born in 1958, the year in which the most people were born in this country. Later this year, I will become 60 years old. That's kind of one of those benchmarks. My generation, we went to the moon, we licked the commies, we built the net. Right? I was an all-American wrestler. That's how I got to college, right? The rest of you who got, silver or bronze, you either went to therapy or learned to drink, one or the other. Tough it out, Tinkerbell. The notion was the world that we grew up in was competing for everything, wasn't it? That was the American culture, right? It's also the American culture of the stock exchange. On September 15, 2008, when the stock exchange collapsed, we laid off 3.5 million people in 3 months. We also came out of it faster. Europe, very different story. You didn't even stress test your banks for 2 years. So the notion is the American economy and the American ethos up to this point has been blue. Is everybody following us? Ironically, when we talk about going to China, I happen to be married to a Chinese woman. I happen to be spending 30-some years in China. The Chinese are the opposite, right? Anybody follow Alibaba? Alibaba has a subscription, or has 3 times more customers than Amazon does, but they make almost no money, right? This is Jack Ma's company. We're going to start seeing something very different. In Mandarin, there are over 50 words for who are you in the family. Are you the rich uncle we suck up to? Are you the crazy uncle we ignore? Who are you, right? Who are you in the family? It's a Mandarin word for that. I want to also point something out that's really important about collaborate, which is your children are also collaborators. The gap between boomers and millennial, according to the Pew Charitable Trust, is the largest gap they've ever measured. Your children are not only not boomers, their ethos is almost the opposite. And the reason I'm telling you this is those of you who look like me, we are no longer on the sunny side of the hill. And if Perkin Elmer is going to continue this great success story that you've got, you're going to have to figure out how to reach out to the yellows. Where are my yellows again? Now they're feeling pretty proud. Yellows. Yeah, the yellows like rock on, man, rock on. Yeah. We're going to have to figure out how the yellows are going to thrive in this environment. So the yellows are all about cooperative environments. Yes, we can, and hope and lifestyle. And what was the name of the chicken? Was the chicken treated fairly? Yes. Did it have a name? Yes, it was Sebastian the chicken, and it was only handheld fed grains of pulp of corn. And okay, it's all good. And was the coffee fair trade? Yes, it was. And were any lizards hurt? They were not hurt. And there's a bicycle lane for them. And yes, I live in the land of the millennials in my labs. I'm just telling you. And incidentally, yellows, I love you. We're making fun of everybody. I love you. But it's very different. And they're very clannish. They're all about community. They don't look at consumer reports. They ask each other about stuff. And it's all about, the social network that they belong to. And is there any such thing as intellectual property? No, this is a clan society. There is no intellectual property. There's search and reapply. We all share. And finally, these people are sages. They have great values. Face it, our kids have way better values than we did. Way better. Partially because we made a little money and gave them the ability to have those values, but they're all about capability and community. They're all about how are we doing. So their magnitude's medium, their momentum is slow, but their sustainability is really high. They're really worried about, what's going to happen to the planet. Thank God somebody is, right? So they're very interested in long-term development. They're very interested in developing people, managing relationships. They pay for experiences. They're very interested in facilitating learning. 3 things about your children that you probably don't know. These are facts. You can judge however you want to judge. Starting in 2014, over half of all births to women under the age of 30 are outside of marriage. Adjusted for the education level of the woman, it actually adjusts upward. Women who are educated don't marry when they have children. Marriage is no longer the norm. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. Right? Interesting. In my generation, I've been married forever. I've been a man under authority for a long time. Right? Number 2, when we asked them where they wanted to work, 184,000 data points. Once again, the Pew Research Trust. They want to work for you? No, they don't want to work for you. Who do they want to work for? They want to work for themselves or some place where they're going to have immediate impact. They're going to create meeting, and they can take 6 weeks off to go to Tanzania and cure river blindness. That's where they want to work. They don't want to work for you. That's why recruiting is so hard. And yes, they're really smart. And finally, what's the fastest growing religion to people on the age of 30 in the United States? What's the fastest growing religion? It's no religion. Atheism, plus 18%. So your children have opted out of marriage, They've opted out of commerce or business, and they've opted out of religion. Are you seeing this? This is the first generation we've ever seen that's horizontal. We've never seen a horizontal generation before, right? So, or maybe we have it like 1860 or something. We don't know what that looks like. It's happening in Europe. Matter of fact, Europe is kind of in front of us on this and is having to deal with some of the blue issues now. Certainly happening in other parts of the world. So this is going to be a really interesting challenge of getting these people into our workplace. They like not-for-profits. It used to be in the old days, my best players all went to really high-end consulting firms or someplace in the valley. Now they all gone to work for the Gates Foundation or start their own foundation or Oxfam or whatever it is. They're all about harmony in the community. My favorite example is the Mayo Clinic. The Mayo Clinic had a problem that patient experience was not very good, didn't do very well at the Mayo Clinic. So what they did was they took the doctors and they put them in the Ritz-Carlton for 2 weeks. And they lived in the Ritz-Carlton. That was pretty nice. And then they played a dirty trick on them. They made them live in their hospital bed for 2 weeks. And what do you think happened? They learned a few things about Ritz-Carlton and how to apply them in their hospital bed, and now patient satisfaction at the Mayo Clinic is pretty doggone good. So the notion is, this is the second tension. Do you feel the tension about short-term profitability and long-term sustainability? Do you feel the tension of boomers and millennials? Do you feel the tension of the horrible Americans and the Chinese? Right, that kind of thing that we all call each other. Now the point is pretty simple. We have a tendency to vilify those people who aren't like us. We have a tendency that the people who aren't like us are the bad people. But in fact, the people who aren't like us are probably the most valuable people in your life. So what would Wolverine be like without Professor X, and vice versa? So I want to start with this very simple proposition for you, which is how you innovate is what you innovate. How you innovate is what you innovate. I want you to think of these propositions as tools in a toolkit. A wrench, a saw, a hammer, a screwdriver. They're all valuable. Are they interchangeable? No. And the biggest mistake people make is they try and use the tool that they're familiar with to do the thing that they're not familiar with, right? So this is the whole idea of dominant logic. So here's my favorite example. Somebody will say, I need radical innovation. Well, what color is the radical innovation? What did you learn? What color is radical? Green, right? But they'll say, I'm going to get radical innovation. And the way I'm going to get it is I'm going to build a 12-step system. The 12-step system is everybody going to be a certified system. It's going to have a whole bunch of technology under it. We're going to go through stage gain system, portfolio management. We're going to have these kind of metrics at the end of it. We're going to get radical innovation. No, you're not. And you know it. What are you going to get? You're going to get predictable, reliable, risk-free, incremental innovation. And that's going to be great until what happens to you? Until the market shifts or somebody develops a technology that actually is cheaper and better than yours. And then you're going to have to figure out how to do that. So the issue is how you innovate is what you innovate, and how you innovate has everything to do with who's in your stable. Do you have people who can do that? We need to facilitate more collaboration both within Perkin Elmer and with external partners. That's what Rob is saying. You need the other guy. You're only as good as the other guy. Incidentally, women, guy up north means women too. It's like y'all in the south. We're all guys. I'm sorry, I don't know why it is. You just need the other person. You need the other person, right? How willing are you to surround yourself with the person who makes you crazy? How willing are you to run a portfolio life so that when you're in one area, you act a certain way? I think about my own life this way. Part of my life, I have to sit on boards. I'm on a lot of journals. I have to wear a red hat. We wear funny ties. Oh, you were a yeoman of the guard your junior year, whatever it is, right? And you have to act red because it's all about journals and getting things statistically right. Part of my life, I have these consulting practices. People have to get out, solve problems, make money. Part of my life, I'm a professor and I have doctoral students and they've got to have time and they want to talk about their lives. And part of my life, I'm in these innovation labs I built and I'm being Dr. Frankenstein. But what would happen if I treated my consultants the way I treat my doctoral students? I'd never make a dime. What would happen if I treated my doctoral students like I treat my consultants? They'd be dumb as a bucket of hair. So here becomes the issue. If you really want to know what your people are, pay attention to what they do under duress. The artist under duress will look for escape routes or do something very unorthodox, crazy Ivans. The engineer will review the data and they'll make a sequence plan to get out of it. The athlete will focus on short-term tasks and they'll fight everybody. They'll become very aggressive. The Greens will reach out to the community and they'll search and reapply solutions. Look at what people do when they're stressed out. Yes, we're all the colors of the rainbow, but we're right-handed or left-handed at the end of the day, right? And that's all this is. The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves, but wiser people so full of doubts. I love this. One of my favorite quotes ever. Why? Because the more somebody is certain of something, the more powerful their dominant logic and the more blind spots they're certain to have. Now, there's also going to be a problem. Here's a question for all of you. How many are married more than 10 years? Raise your hands. 20. Raise your hands. 30. Raise your hands. Okay, how's that little change going? Yeah. How's the change going? What's the number one year for divorce? Overwhelmingly. People always get it wrong. It's overwhelming. It's almost 3x. It's year 1. What do you figure out in year 1? He's not going to change. Yeah, he's not going to change. That's it. You learn to deal with it. It's, that's everybody. You got to have me time, right? There's that thing he does that I don't want to see it. I don't want to know. La, 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 right? And all cultures have it too. So the interesting thing is, people, when they get in these groups, are going to act out. So the Reds are all know-it-alls. They get in the group and they act real professional and they act scientific-y and they judge everybody about right way and wrong way. They get all pissy about stuff. And the Greens are like megalomaniac visions. They never make problems smaller, do you, Green? You make them bigger. Oh, you're small picture thinking. The universe is expanding. Healthcare someday will be right. None of it, all that stuff. Right? Man, God, and law. And they lack discipline. They're always getting up and walking around and taking calls, and they don't, make eye contact. They're Greens. The Blues, what do the Blues do? They take over. The Blues start fighting with people. You ever been in a meeting where the Blues start fighting for no reason? Why are you? They're Blues. They just need to bite somebody, right? And the Yellows, what do the Yellows do? Oh, we can do it. You can do it. And the Blues are thinking, no, you suck. Sit down. But the Yellows go, yes, we can. No. Your basic inclination is to try and fix these people. You can't. You have to know they're going to do this. Every strength brings a weakness. Everybody has a weakness. And you just have to let that go. It's just like being married for a long time. When he starts doing that, you go, okay, we're going to do this now for a while, right? Sure, it's the other way around too. And by balance, I mean having the foresight and aptitude to adjust our style and approach, either as individuals or as an entire team, depending on the situation. So we're going to talk about that very quickly, and then we're going to take some questions here. I want to talk about how to put this all together now. So Greens, raise your hand. Greens are held together by vision. Reds, raise your hand. Reds are held together by process because you have to deal with complexity. Blues, raise your hand. Blues are held together by goals, right? And yellows, raise your hand. Yellows are held together by values. You need all 4 value propositions in order to succeed, in order to scale innovation. But I want to talk about the problem of handoffs. Greens, raise your hand again. The problem with Greens, you're typically orphans. You're brilliant people. You don't want to be like everybody else. And so what you do is you disengage. You go to research centers. You hang out in Cambridge or Palo Alto or Ann Arbor, wherever you get in your head to hang out, and you don't want to deal with the rest of the world. And the problem is you're inventing all kinds of stuff that doesn't relate to the business. That's your problem. You're an orphan, right? And you wonder why you can't get to scale on this crap. So Greens, make a friend with either a blue or a yellow. Make a blue or yellow friend. Because a blue or yellow friend will take that vision and they'll make the vision more practical and talk about people. Now, where are my blues? Raise your hands. Okay, good. Where are my yellows? Raise your hands. You have 2 problems because you're 2 groups. First, blues and yellows, dogs and cats. Dogs and cats. Values versus goals, dogs and cats, boomers and millennials. Now, here's an interesting question. Where are my Xers? Where are my Generation Xers in the room? You are going to be the most valuable generation in America in 100 years. Now, I know we haven't talked about you, and here's why. You're the smallest generation relative to our population. We forgot to have babies. But the second problem is you also speak boomer and millennial. Is everybody following us? You actually know what people are listening to today. You actually can be right-handed and left-handed, so you're going to be invaluable as the ambassadors that connect all of us. And boomers, I hate to tell you this, nobody lives forever, right? None of us get out of this alive, right? Now, the second problem that blues and yellows have is this is by far the longest cycle of innovations. Sometimes referred to as Death Valley or the bottom of the bathtub. And what it means is you're going to have to platoon players on and off your team. Right? It's like mid-relievers at the Red Sox or the Yankees, wherever you guys fight. Red Sox, I know, but I'm saying we might have some Yankees people up here. Traders in our midst. Anyway, the point is this. You're going to have to move people in and out. And the reason is real innovations take 3 times as long and 3 times as much money as you think they are. And I'm being generous by saying 3. The people who are on the panel here will tell you the reality, how long things take. It's very hard. If everybody could do it, they'd do it. So you've got the two problems. You have to have an ambassador, and you have to platoon players on and off. Reds, where are my Reds? Here's the problem, Reds. You're so buttoned up, you've accounted for every nickel and dime and every paper clip. When the chaos shows up, when the deviant shows up, you are not prepared for it. You have no line of sight. Everything's working beautifully. I've got first line, second line, third line all running. And he came fully formed from my forehead like Athena. I'm autonomous, man. I'm a Red. Yeah. The problem is when you start getting the other stuff, you're blindsided. So you need to make friends with a blue or a yellow to tell you what's coming down the pike. Somebody following this? So the issue is the handoffs are the key. And the same is true for groups. The people who are brilliant at the beginning of groups are greens. Why? Because they love making it up as they go along. They have a high tolerance for ambiguity. They're highly creative. They hedge. They accelerate the failure cycle, all the things that you need. But they're the worst people at the end. It doesn't mean you get rid of them, but it means by the time you're at the end of the cycle, start listening to the Reds. But you want everybody to have a line of sight. One size doesn't fit all. Now, I'm going to give you a couple rules. Forget the 80-20 rule. It's a stupid Red rule. I'm sorry, Red, it's a stupid Red rule. It's a Pareto rule, came from looking at mechanical things from a Brazilian engineer about 100 years ago. Basically, it's not human nature. When do people really change? Really? When do they really change? I come back from Miami the other day. This woman next to me said, oh, I read one of your books about 15 years ago, changed my life. So really, what was happening in your life? Well, you know, my husband had a gambling problem, and he gambled the house away, and then he had a drinking problem, and then he had a mistress, and then I got rid of him, and then my law firm got rid of me, and then I filed for bankruptcy and had a divorce, and then I started rebuilding my life. I'm like, my book had nothing to do with your life. Your life sucked, you know. When your life sucks, you change. Why? Because the risk of trying something radical and the reward of staying where you're at is reversed when your life sucks. That's why doing so well is something to be concerned about. Apple in 1997 was trading at $2.96 a share. Front page of the Wall Street Journal, Apple is dead. What happens when you're almost dead is you take the safety off. You're going to play with a live round because this is your last time out. People change when they're in a crisis. Forget 80-20, it's 20-80. People also change when they're on a roll. Ever been in love? Ever been in love? Remember you're first in love? Oh, come on, they called you stud monkey or, you know, whatever they called you. Why do you try stuff when you're in love? Same with companies. Why do you try stuff when you're Tesla right now, when you're throwing sevens every time? Because the risk of trying something radical and the reward of staying where you're at is reversed when you're on a roll. The 20-80 rule is it's easier to change 20% a Perkin Elmer than it is to change 80% a Perkin Elmer 20%. You got to change in the areas where Perkin Elmer has risk and reward reversed. Innovation doesn't move from the inside out, it moves from the outside in. All I got to do is look at social movements, good and bad. This is Gandhi and the March to the Sea. This is Hitler and the brown shirts. Look at how innovation immigrates. It doesn't immigrate from the big incumbent, it immigrates from the startup that has to compete on scope or scale. That's what you have to look for. You're benchmarking against other incumbents. You're looking the wrong way. You're in London. You're going to cross the street. You're going to be road pizza because the cars come in the other direction. Finally, Schumpeter's Gale. Schumpeter was crazy, taught here at Harvard, was an Eastern European like my mother. You know, very Eastern European, very animated people, spicy animated people like my mother. Schumpeter had what he called the Schumpeter's Gale, the sigmoid S. And Schumpeter made this very interesting claim that our dominant logic is so strong that that's even stronger than the competitive milieu that we're in. So that, in fact, what happens to us is of our own doing. So I want to put my model on Schumpeter's model. Schumpeter brings back the term entrepreneur. If you look it up, it comes from Joseph Schumpeter. And Schumpeter, it's an old 17th century French term. Schumpeter says, companies are started by the urge to the superior man. He would have said person. He was a very progressive person, ahead of his time. He died, I think, in 1946. He died right after the war. He writes a book, incidentally, if you're interested, it's unreadable. It's called Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy. And you can just see him sitting in a restaurant in Prague. You Americans make my ass twitch. He's that guy, right? He's that kind of brilliant guy, but unreadable book. But then Schumpeter says the entrepreneur meets the business person. So now we have Spark and we have Tinder, boom, and he calls this a sigmoid S. Companies start to grow ballistically. Says the same thing for economies. Schumpeter then says we get the yellows on board. Schumpeter says then we get the reds on board. And in each successive group, we get bigger and bigger and bigger. And then Schumpeter has his famous warning, which I see on bumper stickers. It's not attributed to Schumpeter, but it's old Joe saying, the seeds of our undoing are sown at the pinnacle of our success. The seeds of our undoing are sown at the pinnacle of our success. That's why Sears doesn't become Amazon. That's what old Joe is saying. He calls this the point of creative destruction. He says this is the point where you kill yourself, right? At this moment where you've had done so well, where you're a buy. And Schumpeter says if that's the case, you need to start looking for places where you can have places where things are disrupted, places where things are anomalous. You need to start being concerned and looking for the next place that you might be disrupted so that you can start growing. And he says the best thing that ever happens to a company, they go very quickly through what he calls the death spiral. This is what happened to Apple. This is what happens to a lot of companies that are saved. It also happens to companies that die. So what's the point? Stop believing you can see the future. Make smaller, wider bets. Stop choose big over fast. Pick up your pace. Right? The whole idea of, we're going big or going home. I loved in the last recession, they all went home. It's kind of a ridiculously arrogant point of view. Mistaking your managers for innovators. No, your innovators are kind of weird. When's the last time you hired a weirdo? Having more ambition than capability. That's also one of my favorites. We're going to beat these guys. Have you ever seen the other guys? It's like talking to the young football players at Michigan. Oh, we're going to stomp out Ohio State. You ever see them come through the tunnel? No, I don't think so, Junior. I think it's going to be a bar fight. Base your strategy on your capability. Starting at the center, moving out. No innovation moves from the outside in. It's 2080. Listening to the wrong customers. Incumbents are never going to move first. They don't need to, just like you. And finally, failing to connect the dots. That's really why we're here. The art of progress is to preserve order and preserve change among order. So just a few things to leave you with before we take some questions here. First of all, the cavalry isn't coming. The cavalry ain't coming. Remember the old Gabby Hayes, in the John Wayne movies? Cavalry ain't coming! Cavalry ain't coming! What does it mean? It means you have to exhibit some self-authorizing behavior. It either means fight. That's what young people say. I'm going to fight the man. Good luck with that. It's got a camel whoop ass. He can whoop all over you, right? Or I'm going to run. Where are you going to run? Or I'm going to roll over. Or I'm going to actually lead the innovation, which is what the people in this room have to do. Take a higher point of view. If you're a green, look down at yourself and say, where are you good and where aren't you good? Who do you need around you? Devise with visionary eyes. One of the things about innovation strategy that makes it very different from normal strategy is it's a very fluid game. Things are constantly being invented. Things are constantly being moved. There's a lot of sensing in it. Actually, innovation strategy comes to us from military strategy. So when I teach at the War College, it's not a big stretch. It's the same kind of thing, just a different packet, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to outmaneuver the other guy. He's trying to outmaneuver you, and the consequences are serious. Innovation is the most Darwinistic form of capitalism. It is by far the most Darwinistic form of capitalism. You got to make it up as you go along. Don't fall in love with your plan. Make adjustments. Take advantage of what you're seeing. Hide inside Trojan horses. Everybody here has a big project that's got money, guns, and lawyers. You got an innovation project that everybody talks a good game about, but it doesn't get any money, guns, or lawyers. Put it inside the other project. But Jeff, that's sedition. I know. That's cheating. I know. Yeah, I know. Got it. But we're trying to introduce deviance, right? We're trying to find a way to get deviance. So think of yourself as human malware, right? Fail early, fail often, and fail off Broadway. Camelot, when it opened on Broadway in 1960, it didn't open on Broadway, it opened in Toronto when it was a small city, was 7.5 hours long. The producer, a guy named Moss Hart, had a heart attack. True story. Went to Boston, right? You guys, was 4.5 hours. Went to New Haven, it was 3.5 hours. The composers, Lerner and Lowe, knew they were dead. So they cut it down into little 5-minute strips and put it on the old Ed Sullivan show. Went really well, recombined the show, was about 2.5 hours on Broadway, became the soundtrack for the Kennedy administration. Interestingly enough, what would have happened if they would have opened at 7.5 hours on Broadway? They'd been dead. It closed the same night. So the point is, fail, but fail out of sight. Don't fail in front of everybody, right? I worked on a project called C2, which you know as Coke Zero. With a long story, I won't bore you with it, but how basically we made it work was we took it to Tunisia, where nobody could find us. We failed and brought it back. Oh, it was all great, right? Show, don't tell. Anybody know why the first iPod looks the way it does? It was carved out of a bar of ivory soap. Can you imagine that? For prototyping, call Clem, we're going to do some whittling. Why would he carve it out of it? This is something that happened with IDEO in the old days, right? Why a bar of ivory soap? And the reason is simple. Most of your brain is designed to make pictures and move your fine digits, but make pictures. When we talk about innovation, we're talking about something that people have trouble imagining. It doesn't happen yet. So we have to make a picture. It's the I have a dream speech. It's why Disney built the castle when he's being sued and the whole place is underwater and he's dying of cancer. Right? There's the reason you do that, because we're going to visualize that. And finally, leave room for the stuff you don't know now. Why do we have to know the end of the story? I trained consultants at one of the top consulting firms in the world for about a decade, and they always have that implement arrow. And my big thing was, well, implement doesn't mean you know everything yet. You're at version 1. You got to go to version 2, version 3, version 4, you're not anywhere near ready to do this because you don't know what you're doing yet. And I'm going to leave you with this thought, and that is the DeGraff hypothesis. I see this everywhere. They'll probably put it on my grave. I think I've done better work than this, but this is what people remember. The amount of innovation an organization produces is inversely related to the number of ridiculous PowerPoint slides and stupid, elaborate process diagrams it makes about innovation. Innovation is a work in progress, and as they say, just do it. Now, do we have time for a couple of questions? All right, so we got some microphones. Let's have at the old professor. Questions, comments, pushback. Who wants to fight? No? Oh, come on. Oh, I'll play nice. I'll be a millennial. Who? And there's a ton of material. I see a lot of you taking pictures. We have a ton of stuff for you in the back of the room, so don't worry about that.
So while I understand the need to simplify things down to 4 discrete domains,
Yep.
humans are nowhere near that simple. And I've seen these kinds of presentations, and they're useful tools, but I would be curious to hear you talk about the nuance of the different shades, and how do you identify when someone really needs to be encouraged to accentuate the yellow parts of themselves or the red if they're traditionally a green.
There's a lot of that we're going to talk about in the afternoon. So you're right on, and you're in front of me, and there's a lot more to this. So one of the documents I'm going to give you is going to talk about how to interact and when to interact. So that'll get that for you. The first question is more relevant even, which is there's a colleague of mine who did a lot of the seminal work on this, named Kim Cameron. And Kim Cameron divides the 4 quadrants into 3 sub-quadrants for each, or 3 sub-triads for each of the quadrants. So the notion is, can this become refined? It can become incredibly refined. In the database that we have at Michigan, it actually goes into industries and how industries are different by this. So on a regular sort of basis, keeping this map. The only reason I'm doing it this way is to kind of introduce a simple form so that we can think this way in a general way. But is there an opportunity to drill down? Yes, much more granular. We got another. He wants to ask a follow-up question. So let's.
Why is it always 4? I mean, it's Myers-Briggs, it's this, it's this. Why? It seems like an incredibly reproducible pattern, but it always comes out as 4.
Yeah. Did you everybody hear? He said, "Why 4? Why is it always 4?" I could tell you why it was 4 for me. The issue was measuring 12 or assessing 12 had 2 problems. This is going back to the Kim problem. One, getting an assessment, an accurate read on the group here would take about 45 minutes, and my response rate went to about 8%. I'm just giving you we all have the attention span of, the current this. And the second problem was, remember, a lot of my work is Wall Street work. Some of the work you might see in ETFs, right, exchange-traded funds. The problem with that is they don't like lots of variability. They want things to be smaller. So the proof part has 2 parts. It has a part that I'm acknowledging that's kind of social, what happens within an organization, but there's also this part about value. So what I think I'm bringing to the table is saying, what's not junk science is I'm beating this number that everybody pays. The challenge with that is when you look at how people do that, the people make it very complicated, so it's very hard to tell what's actually predictive, and the people try and make it very simple so it's easier to manage. So I made a practical decision. Could it be more scientific? It could, and if Kim Cameron was here, and bless his heart, I love the guy, he would be on your side. And he'd say, Jeff, you made this too simple. It should be the complicated original way it was. So I hope I answered your question. Someone else? No one has any other questions? Oh, back here.
So it's a little bit to his too, but do people typically have sort of like a secondary? Is there sort of a rank order to this, or is it sort of you're kind of all in one camp or another camp?
No, I think they do have yes, and in fact, the assessment which is on the last slide, which we're making available to people, right, will tell you what that order is. But there's a secondary question. there's a secondary piece to your question, which is what's called role efficacy. And role efficacy means, are we the same person in all settings? And the answer, related also to the first person's question here, is no, we're not. But here's the key. The key is we're also, let me back up, because I need to make two distinctions here. What your type is doesn't also tell us your competency. You could be a green and totally suck. Does that make sense? There are people who are, and that's an issue of talent, experience, and development, whatever that's happened to you. So there are levels of this, like Masons, and we can measure that. Are you a highly developed green? Are you a poorly developed green, right? But the more interesting question is role efficacy. And here becomes the challenge of this. The challenge is we often play a role that is not our strong suit, and we often play it for two reasons. We often play it because it's missing on our team. So the role of the such and such will be played tonight by Patrick. Well, the problem with that is that tells you what? You're missing a person on your team. You're trying to do something that you're not qualified to do. But the second is an issue of range. Now here becomes the dilemma. Some people have great range, and the term we use for this a lot is ambidextrous leadership. In fact, I just wrote a paper for Duke University as a magazine. I just wrote a paper about this, which kind of means a jack of all trades but a master of none. Some people have great range. Some people don't have great range, and what they have to do is be aware of what their range really is. And I'm the latter. I'm really good at 2 quadrants, and I'm really bad at the other 2. This makes sense? So I have to make up for the other 2. The problem I have, and maybe you have, is when I have to play one of those other 2 roles because no one else is playing it. I'm not playing it very well. That becomes the challenge. So that's the real importance of having the rest of the team around you that can kind of manage that. And I have a technique that might help, and we could do it in the afternoon. It would take a little too long to explain it here, but I'm happy to show you a way of figuring that out relatively quickly. Do we have time for one more? One quick one? Yeah, then we think we get to eat after that. We're released.
Thanks for the presentation. So a question regarding, let's say that there's a need for change in the culture of innovation within any company. Mm-hmm. Would the change, do you see that the change would be coming from up to down or down up or a horizontal one? So where's the kind of the...
The change in a company is almost always going to come where the middle of the model, the blue and red, which is current reality, has failed. So this is a part of why innovation is not a middling phenomena. Innovation happens typically when something is either exceptional or in failure. And we can go through the history of this. There's a lot of truth to that. So here becomes the key. Where is that likely to happen? So if the center of the organization has started to fail, it's going to come top down. Right? Investors are going to pressure, Rob, it's going to be a lot of, hopefully we don't have to go through that, but we want to avoid that. But more likely, and this is why innovation often happens in the provinces, why it happens far away from headquarters, is because you have to do a lot of things on your own, right? You're free and responsible. I don't know where you're located, but usually when you're in one of those divisions and it starts to fail, the normal way of doing things hasn't worked, and because you're kind of out of sight, or the line of sight is hard, or all the people who gave you a lot of rules, it hasn't worked out the way they've given you, usually that's where you're going to see the change start. If this makes sense to you, you're going to find it in those places that have failed. And the reason failure is going to be a really good piece for everybody in this room is it gives you a lot of cover, because the normal way of doing things has not worked. Is this making sense? It's failed. And part of what happens is the honesty issue is what holds you back. So one of my favorite examples, I was at a very large company about 6 months ago, and this person was talking about how their stage gating system wasn't working, and I asked them a question about the previous one, and well, that didn't really work very well, and the previous one, that didn't work very well. And then the audience started to laugh. And I said, well, what's the problem? They said, stage gating systems aren't the appropriate tool here. Is this making sense? It's a red tool in a green situation. I said, okay. So now, are we willing, being honest about that, to try a green type of tool, maybe a little riskier? So that's typically the way it happens. And also one of the things that's very positive that I'm seeing in this room is acquisitions are a great way of changing the gene pool. You introduce an acquisition, there's really only a couple things that happen. Either the organization subsumes the acquisition and sort of, holds a pillow over your face and you succumb, or the acquisition begins to infect the organization. which I think is very positive. I want to thank you for spending time. We're going to talk to you this afternoon. Have a good lunch. See you later.